Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Planning, Economic, and Community Services meeting. I'm joined today by Commissioner Rita Davis Johnson in District 5 and Commissioner Jeff Rader of District 2. And we have other commissioners maybe joining us soon. We got staff meeting members are here, and we are ready to take care of business and do what we have to do to move the county forward. Commissioners, if you had a chance to review 1870 and 1904, please, at the time, if you can, I'll entertain a motion for those 2 minutes of those items.
I have, and I move that we approve the minutes of both meetings.
Beautiful. Second. Moved and properly second for 1870 and 1904. These are minutes from June 28th, 2022 and July 7th, 2022. It's been motioned and properly second. All in favor of the motion, say your hands and words. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. And now we'll move to our discussion item we've been trying to get to for like the last 3 meetings. And it's an issue we would probably have to deal with more. But I just want to get the initial discussion going. And I had asked that the law department send it to all the commissioners ahead of time since I received it and give us some feedback so we can move forward at the appropriate time. So I'll turn it over to our Planning and Sustainability Department or Law Department to sound it off. And just a little history before they come on. I proposed this back in 2009, or no, was it, where was, Burrow was still here, and it was not well received. And so at that point, we said, well, we'll put it on the back burner. And now, of course, you've noticed the last 15 years, things have progressed with now workforce housing is a main topic, as well as affordable housing. And so I asked them to resurrect this proposal, but also get feedback from experts in the field because things have changed and definitions have changed. And the staff has come back with me with some findings and the report. And I'm glad that they stuck with me to get this through. And now it may be a timely opportunity to discuss this ordinance, because this is something, when you talk about housing, we can do something about, which is to do incentives and to engage. County does not have a housing department that's under the DeKalb Housing Authority and HUD, and the state funds housing, but we can have some input on rezoning and zoning items that may include housing. And so this piece could possibly help us with that. So take it away, Planning Department.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Johnson. Mic check, can everybody hear me before I get started?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I am Cedric Hudson, Deputy Director for Planning Services within the Planning and Sustainability Department. And this was a collaborative effort between staffs, between Planning and Sustainability, Community Development, and the Law Department. And so it says June 2022, that's when we were prepared to give the original presentation, but we didn't get a chance to change. That's why I'll move on. And the purpose for workforce housing is we want to discuss an ordinance that would encourage workforce housing, housing units countywide within DeKalb County, give people options for, give people affordability options within the county. Some additional background also, I know that Commissioner Johnson had mentioned some background, just some technical background to add to that. Is when we talk about affordability, it's a targeted area within 60 and 120% of the area medians, or the area's median household income. We talk about affordable housing, a lot of times there are affordability options between 30 and 60% of the median income. So this one is targeted at a bit higher range of affordability between 60 and 120. And we'll talk about who that affects specifically a little bit later in the presentation. Why is it needed? a lot of DeKalb County citizens are spending at least a third of their net income on housing, at least. Okay, so many of our citizens are cost burdened. And this was talked about a lot in our housing study with Dr. Rich. And they may have some more updated numbers once we get the report, but this is what we do know that is true about DeKalb County citizens, that they are spending a lot of money on housing outside of utilities. We also want to maintain affordability for a full range of our workers. Again, talking about 60 to 120%, there are already some opportunities for those making 30 and 60% or 30 and 80%. But like I said, we also want to maintain affordability for that range between the 60 and 120% of the area median income. We also want to meet multi-generational needs. For instance, there are a lot of startups that are needed for students that have graduated or finished college. And for them to be closer to their jobs, there needs to be some assistance to at least help them be closer to their jobs, where you don't have to drive to work all the time and you're being walkable or quick commute to their jobs also, and be affordable. And also this ordinance, at least for right now, is drafted to be mostly voluntary. So it doesn't remove the market units, but we simply want to provide incentives to include workforce housing units. This is just a general framework guide. There's more to the ordinance than this. I don't know if Matthew wants to chime in on this part or not. Quite sure. If not now, he'll talk about it later on. But in general, the framework of this ordinance talks about applicability, what areas in the county is eligible to take advantage of it. We talk about incentives. One of the incentives is density bonus. We also talk about permitting, quick permitting on our side, similar to what we do for our overlay districts. And also one of the main parts of this ordinance to kind of make what really makes it work is the workforce housing unit at WHU, workforce housing unit agreement, which we cover in the ordinance, which talks specifically about what the applicant needs to include within this agreement, what happens to it, who needs to review it, and what happens to it through an entire process. And also there are deed restrictions and control periods within the final piece of the ordinance. And so just real quickly, I'm not going to go through all the bullets. I'm quite sure we probably hit that in the discussion part, the Q&A part of the ordinance, but applicability, activity centers, mostly within all of our, if you recall, in our comprehensive plan, our activity centers include neighborhood centers, town centers, and regional centers, comprehensive plan, tax allocation districts, federal opportunity zones, and tax exempt abatement areas. Some of the incentives we include 25% beyond the base allowance, but 65% of these bonus units have to be workforce housing units. And so here's some more bulleted items in terms of some more incentives that we include in terms of the zoning package. And the WHU agreement, workforce housing unit agreement, for the most part, we review it. And right now, the way it's written is that the Board of Commissioners approve it. So I'll talk about the process shortly, a little bit later in the presentation. We talk about the 60 to 120% affordability. We just grabbed the sampling right here of who does that include and what those median incomes look like. And so you see that use firefighter, police officers, teachers, electricians, and we added in some graphic designers and accountants. So really eligible people, you don't have to be a DeKalb County employee. Just want to make that clear, but you have to be a resident of DeKalb County, whether you be in unincorporated DeKalb County or in one of the cities that are within DeKalb County. Some highlights over the years, we've looked at other jurisdictions. This is not a new tool used for inclusionary housing, but Montgomery County, Maryland has been using it for a long time. I used to live in Baltimore. and I was very familiar with it up there. I know it started with voluntary, but really when it began to gain some traction was really when it became mandatory. And so Brookhaven, I know we've spoken to Brookhaven with their development of their workforce housing ordinance, and also there's Boulder, Colorado, and Atlanta, Georgia, right next to us. And I just wanted to just point out that we've looked at some other jurisdictions, and here are some highlights in terms of what their ordinance has entails. So I talked about the process earlier, and just real simply, quick 5 steps. There's an application and screening of each applicant. There are housing agreements. We talked about that WHU Workforce Housing Unit Agreement. That is a vital part of it. There are departmental reviews like we normally do within planning and sustainability. We take it through inspections and certificate of occupancy, and also there's a monetization. So let me back up a minute to really number 2. And one of my questions to the board in terms of how we want to handle this. There's one way every time someone signs a housing agreement or there's an agreement made, it's been reviewed by us. Where the ordinance is made right now is that all of these have to come to you. So every time there is a workforce housing agreement that is agreed upon between the department and the applicant, you have to go ahead and vote on this. The ordinance specifically names the specific items that need to be in the agreement, which is made by the applicant and reviewed by us. Another recommendation is that we could handle this quite simply the way we handle our overlay districts. So we could be more specific in this ordinance in terms of how we want the process to go. If we want it to be administrative, you can still view the ordinance administratively in terms of what's in it and what it plans on being, but that's your decision on which way you want that to go. And one more thing is that the land use amendments rezone, if there's a land use amendment or a rezone that's required, this process doesn't stop that. So we can probably do this at the same time that's going on. So that's one thing that we wanted to point out. And also, I think the last part is monetization. And Alan Mitchell may want to talk about that specifically later on in terms of what it takes to monitor these projects once it has been completed. Just very quickly, this quick timeline of where we are. Right now, we are still, we have revised the draft many times since I've been working on it since 2008. So, so we've been working on it and really trying to tweak it and really trying to pay attention to the trends in terms of what should be in here and what should not be in here. So we're still there, and we still want open to some more comments from the commissioners in terms of what this thing should look like. There is a public outreach. I really want to stress that a little bit more than public hearing part of this between August and October, meaning that I think that once we have solidified what this thing needs to be, that there's an educational component in terms of getting this out to the DeKalb County citizens and getting some input and letting them know what this looks like. And obviously, once the public hearing and if it's approved, there's an administration and implementation part of the process. So I'll close by saying next steps, we're going to continue to gain comments to finalize the ordinance language that we have. I just talked about the public engagement process and education of it. We are in the process of the 2050 Unified Plan, Comprehensive Plan update. So we have made comments to Kimberly Horn, our consultants, and we'll be meeting with them in a project meeting tomorrow, actually, to make sure that we have this noted within the update of our plan. There's a development community survey that we want to get out tomorrow that we've created. Want to hear what our development community thinks about the draft of the workforce housing once we've solidified some of the language a little bit more. And also, I talked about the public hearing process versus administrative. I'd like to get some feedback from you in terms of what you think about that. And I know Alan had mentioned about if we move forward, he talked about some additional monitoring staff that may need to be in the budget to accommodate that. So with that, I will yield the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hudson. I appreciate your due diligence and planning and law department. I want to open it up to our committee members, Commissioner Rader, then Commissioner Davis Johnson. Mr. Welch, you want to chime in before, or you want to wait?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I just wanted to point out just two things that had changed in this draft since the last time we discussed this, just to make it digestible for the commissioners and the audience. Two main changes that I would highlight. The draft ordinance does now apply to both rental and sale properties, which is an expansion from our previous discussion. Also, just to highlight what Mr. Hudson said about applicability. We have designed this so that it kind of is partially voluntary and partially required depending on decisions made by a developer. So what I mean by that is this program as currently drafted would be available in activity centers and job clusters as defined in the ordinance, which exists throughout the county. They're not mandatory in those areas, but they are available. The density bonuses are available in those areas. Where the program would become mandatory or required as currently drafted would be in two distinct situations. One, if the development is to be located within a tax allocation district and the developer is seeking some sort of financing or funding through that TAD. So it's both located and seeking financing through the TAD. The second area in which it would become required is if the development is in an enterprise or opportunity zone. And again, they are seeking abatement, financing, tax exemption for being in that zone. So not just placing it in the zone, but taking advantage of some of those tax advantages in the zone would then make this required. The other thing I would point out is that as currently drafted, the control period, the period over which the workforce housing units must be made available is set at 15 years for both sale and rental units. In the examples that were in the presentation, you may note that in some instances, those periods are lower at 10 years. In some instances, they're longer, 20 or 25 years. So those are just some of the highlights that I wanted to make sure the commissioners were aware of as they review this and provide feedback to law and planning as to how you'd like this to move forward.
Thank you. Just to add to that, with opportunity zones, commissioners, I'm still waiting on the side of DeKalb. We're waiting on the state to designate those areas. And you know how long we've been waiting for that. So hopefully the state will designate some areas around the opportunity zones. And Mr. DeBar and I have been working to make sure we can get that on the agenda to talk to us about it. So I'll turn it over to Commissioner Rader and Commissioner Davis Johnson.
Thank you, and I appreciate the presentation and the draft ordinance. First point that I'd like to make is that I believe that we need to build in a mandatory workforce housing, mandate for new multifamily projects in activity zones. Or activity areas, character areas, activity center character areas. And I think that it's important to have that, that affordability mandate there, because without the mandate, the regulation or the policy does not really affect the land prices within those areas. And what I find is that the biggest quote impediment to housing affordability and outside of the shortages of new housing and available housing is that people claim that land costs too much for them to be able to make a discretionary decision to provide affordable housing. And so by making it mandatory, then it gets baked into the value of the land because it is a regulatory burden that is placed on top of it, and it will depress, the speculative profit that long-term holders of land may realize due to the hot real estate market. So I would really encourage us to, to do like Brookhaven and others, and have a mandatory an inclusionary mandate for workforce housing. I'm trying to stay away from saying inclusionary zoning because this is not necessarily dependent upon a rezoning, but instead on the development process and getting your permits in order to build. I do think that we need to focus on multifamily housing in activity zoned, activity center character areas, because that is what is anticipated in activity centers is higher density urban development. To the extent that we're going to try to incent affordable single family housing, that is much more likely to occur in something other than an activity center. And I think we need to think of a mechanism that might be appropriate for that, unless we wanted to, just make a general inclusionary mandate, or, perhaps the incentives associated with affordable single-family housing. I wanted to also drill down on this issue of making the expectation contingent upon tax allocation district and tax abatement. First, as it relates to tax abatement, the schedule for incentive on tax abatement does not have any relationship to the amount of affordable housing that would be delivered. It instead is tied to the assessed value of the property itself and the avoidance of taxes. And when you make a threshold level of investment, you, quote, qualify for a specific tax abatement. And as a result, you could end up with some very, very expensive affordable units based upon a tax abatement that may not be proportional to the actual cost of delivering those units. So I really think that we need to be careful. And if we are going to use that mechanism, and I will tell you that in the state legislature, there's a lot of skepticism about tax abatement as a tool for multifamily development at all because of the service burden that it inherently creates. But if we are going to do that, I think that it really needs to be tied to the incremental cost of providing the benefit, the affordable units, and they need to demonstrate that there is a direct relationship between the two. As it relates to tax allocation districts, let's remember that tax allocation districts are specifically formed to implement a redevelopment plan that may or may not focus on housing or incentives for development in general. Instead, most tax allocation districts are focused in being able to meet a deficiency in infrastructure in an area that would make it more able to bear the burden of the development that is represented by that opportunity. So many tax allocation districts do not devolve any benefit to individual property owners, but instead build stormwater infrastructure or road improvements or transit improvements or perhaps a shared parking facility or something along those lines. And so I think that the applicability of these within a tax allocation district may depend upon exactly what you're trying to accomplish there. We may have an industrial tax allocation district where, such as the area where we're trying to build out the movie industry in South DeKalb. That idea is not very directly related to the housing issue in that area, or at least it may not be addressed and may not be identified as a need through the redevelopment plan. So I think that we really need to tie those to, what is in that redevelopment plan so that we have that alignment, because, TAD law also requires that you follow that plan and you devote your resources to achieving the plan. As it relates to, things that we can do to stimulate this, one area that we've really tried to push forward, and particularly I saw the estimation of income for single person affordability for a unit that would accommodate a single person. We are now placing reference to micro units in certain of our zoning conditions, and yet we have not yet defined and developed the requirements for micro units as a form of housing. Micro units are intended to be an inherently affordable form of housing by virtue of the fact that they are going to be small square footage intended to accommodate a single person with a minimal footprint. And then there is the question as to how much public infrastructure those things require. So I do think that being able to develop a definition and the requirements associated with micro units may well be a great way of generating some extra units as they relate to activity center type development, because they'll be less expensive to develop. And if we can add them as a by right increment, even where the density of a project may be limited to a point below the district's ultimate, the zoning district's ultimate capacity, I think there's an opportunity of using micro units to help us to accomplish that. And then the final point I will make, and I don't have an answer to this, is whereas I am inclined to try to increase affordable units all throughout the county, I know nevertheless that if we're not careful, that those units, particularly if they're required or if there is a substantial incentive, may end up being concentrated in areas where there are already a relatively larger number of units and be harder to put into the job centers where we think that they would be most useful to the workforce that has every expectation and right to be able to live in the community where they work. So we may want to think about how we structure this so that it doesn't just become a proposal or an option that is taken advantage of in those areas that are sort of the market already is closest to workforce or affordability, but instead try to make sure that these units are placed so that we can improve our jobs housing balance in DeKalb and make them, so that people have the capacity and the option to live near where they work, even if it might be a smaller unit or perhaps not all the housing that they could get if they chose to go a longer distance. I think more and more people are seeing, being able to live and work in the same area as being an advantage that they're willing potentially to trade square feet or something like that off on. And then the only other thing that really jumped out is this broad range between 60 and 120% of average median income. Whenever you have a range like that, you can always expect that if the incentive is equally available, whether it's at the low end or the high end, that you're going to see people pick the high end of the price range. And so we may want to look at some means of scaling the incentive to make it more valuable for the lower priced units that we would like to get developed and that are the hardest ones to get done. So if you're developing at 120 AMI, maybe you don't get the benefit that you would if you developed at 60 or 80% AMI. so that we can, make sure that we meet those needs that are the hardest of all to meet. So those are initial comments. I'd really love to get some reaction on trying to incorporate a affordable housing mandate in this, because I think that it's, time. Atlanta has a mandate. The city of Brookhaven has a mandate. I think that, the mandate will be most important in trying to inform the real estate market and not, allow folks to say, well, I'd love to do it, but I paid too much for the property. Instead, if we can say everybody knows that it's got to be in there, then they'll factor it in from the very beginning. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Mr. Hudson, you want to answer some of those questions now, Commissioner? You just want to take the list?
Well, and yeah, I mean, you can take the list. That was kind of, I wouldn't want to point that fire hose at me and then have me have to answer.
You just did a whole class. I'm learning myself. So thank you, Commissioner Marita Davis Johnson.
Yeah, I listened, and thank you so much, Mr. Hudson, for that much needed presentation. And I'm sure that we will continue discussions on it. I think that from Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Rader, I mean, it was a in-depth educational component for me. And so I'm going to pass on comments and questions right now. And of course, I will be having some in the future based upon discussions.
All right. Thank you so much. And just for the committee and the commissioners, what I would like to do now is I've sent it out, and to get more feedback from you all is to actually put it on the agenda and then defer it for at least 60 days so you can have time to look at it and, get through the summer as well. See if that's okay with the committee. And I think most of it's been baked for a while because I've been working on it for almost a year before I brought it forward, to see if that's okay with the committee. And then
I'm fine.
I'd be glad to do that also. I'd just like to get the consensus from the committee that we can also look at some of those broader issues and maybe try to incorporate them into or at least incorporate our consideration or recommendations related to it.
Yes, I think that's why I want to give us a little bit more time, 60 days, those ideas, and give the staff an opportunity to vet them and tell us which ones are doable and we can move forward. So I think that's all appropriate for this discussion.
Yeah.
So I'll entertain them. Unless we have any more questions.
So I move that we sponsor this on to the BOC agenda with a recommendation for a 60-day deferral to consider the substance of the draft as well as some potential improvements based both on input in this meeting and then subsequent input from members of the Board of Commissioners. And then, I think it would be great to put this out for review from the affordable housing community because, they'll definitely have some ideas.
Yes, and I think that's good. I'm sorry, I need a second.
Yeah, I second that.
And Mr. Hudson, you can start the process as well with the public, getting public input and outreach as well, so we can get a community council and planning commission so they can start to review it as well, so we can try to get all of this synergy back at the same time.
We'll do. We have a development oversight committee meeting tomorrow. So we have a survey already prepared for them to kind of get some feedback there. And with the upcoming PC and CC that we have coming on, we put some information on our website too once we get the marketing material approved and vetted.
Yeah, I want to go back to ULI, ANDP, Fair Housing, groups that can help us to make it as strong as possible, and the development community as well. So then
I might also add, and the end of the year, I will lose my planning commission member because she is no longer going to be in District 2. But I would say April Atkins, works full time in the affordable housing space, and I would certainly encourage you to get it to the agencies, Federal Home Loan Bank, and others that have a specialty in this area, and see what you can get from them and from many of our capable board members.
Beautiful. All right, it's been moved and properly second to add it to the agenda and defer for 60 days. All in favor of the motion? Words and
Aye.
Aye.
motion carries. And now we'll go to our first agenda item, 1678. And from here from Ms. Horner.
Let's see. 78.
All right, this is a change order. It's change order number 1 to contract number 1277636 for poured in place installation services. It's an annual contract with 2 options to renew for use by the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Affairs. This contract consists of poured in place installation and repair services for playgrounds throughout the DeKalb County Park System. It's awarded to Playworks Play Sets, LLC, amount not to exceed $285,705, and purchasing does recommend approval of this change order.
Thank you so much. All right, Mr. Ellis, you want to add anything?
Just that it's great to have this replacement done there at Mason Mill Park. Since I've been here, we patched it many times, and this be good to get this accomplished.
Excellent. All right, commissioners, any questions?
So this one will only be sufficient to cover Mason Mill?
That's correct.
Do we have other needs that we need to make sure that we have the capacity to address?
Yes, we've always have needs on, but we're doing a lot of that with SPOS. This happens to be a non-SPOS item, so it's coming forward to you today.
Okay, I just, I don't want to soak up all the capacity. So
It's a large playground, so that is a large number, but
I know it is.
we all know how large it is.
It's a large hot playground too.
Right.
If it gets more shade, that'd be good too.
All right, thank you. Any more questions before we entertain the motion? Here now, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to recommend approval.
Need a second?
Second.
All right, moving properly second. Is there any more comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, words and hands? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, 1678. And now we'll go to 1751.
Okay, that is change order number 1 to contract number 1289411 for cooperative purchase agreement for public restrooms and other structures for use by the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Affairs. The contract consists of the purchase and installation of a storage scorekeeper booth at Midway Park and the installation of 3 restroom buildings at Exchange Park, awarded to Romtech Inc., amount not to exceed $1,590,000. And purchasing's recommendation is to approve this change order.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Horner. Mr. Ellis, you want to add? Then I'll get to you, Commissioner Rader.
Nothing really to add. I think it was self-explanatory. It's some projects that we're moving along on.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Rader.
This is a change order from a contract to provide, and I suppose that these restrooms at least are the sort of standardized restrooms that we've been using elsewhere in the county. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, can you tell us where we are with some of those other projects? Because I know that we've approved some in the past and that there's still a few of them outstanding. Can you tell us where we are with the other ones in terms of trying to complete those projects?
There are 2 that we have, I think it's 2, maybe 3 that we are having installation issues with, or working through purchasing to try to solve those. But the rest of them, we had delays, some with one of them at Boulder Crest with the sewer connection. But we have that completed. So it's just really the installation at 2 of the different ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we're moving forward systemically with this additional amenity in restrooms, obviously, when people see new restrooms, they want restrooms. And do we have a particular, target or characteristic where we, below which, we don't put in restrooms? I mean, is there a complement of particular uses that we look at a park in order to justify the restroom? I'd just like for us all to be able to say, tell people where a restroom is sort of an available aspiration.
We're less likely to put one at a small neighborhood park, but we'll want to put one where there's a large pavilion that will possibly be renting out. A lot of times we won't rent them if there's not a restroom near them. And also if there's a large playground. So more of your larger, more higher use parks are the ones that we recommend for restrooms.
Okay, but I mean, that's sort of a qualitative type of a thing. Is there a particular use number that they can aspire to or something along those lines? Because I know, for instance, I have, some pavilions that are heavily programmed and in fact, are reserved and that type of a thing. They do events there, but, and they've requested restrooms. I just don't know whether or not they'd be justified, notwithstanding, a high level of use. And as you know, I often have, intensively used parks since we don't have that much in space in District 2.
I don't think there's anything set in stone. Again, I think it's really the demand. And if the demand is there, and then also if the neighborhood supports it, we would probably also in support.
Okay, well, I'll get back to you on some of those.
All right. Are there any more questions? If not, I'll entertain the motion on 1751.
Yeah, I make a motion at 1751 be approved.
All right, need a second.
Second.
Moved and properly second. Is there any more comments? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, show of hands and words. Aye.
Aye.
Oh, I just wanted to really quickly, since I see that the funding category is splossed, are these replacement restrooms?
That is correct. Everything in SPOS is replacement.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. We go to 1755. Ms. Warner.
Okay, this is change order number 4 to cooperative agreement contract number 1237719 for athletic surfacing with related materials, supplies, installation, and services for use by the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Affairs. The contract consists of the purchase, design, construction, and installation of synthetic turf. It's awarded to Advanced Sports Group, LLC. Purchasing is recommending approval of this change order, and I'd just like to point out that we're not requesting funds because we have already have approved contingency funds that can be used for these field conversions.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Ellis?
Just that this would help us finish out the Gresham Park fields 1, 2, and 3. And if you've been out there, this is going to be the icing on the cake to really make it look like a finished product out there. So we're excited about getting this completed.
Oh, yes, it's exciting. Beautiful. All right. Commissioners, any questions before you entertain a motion?
Yeah. I mean, we have, why so many change orders?
I think I might let Catherine answer this, but on this one in particular, I don't think we were specific about adding the fields 1, 2, and 3 onto the original. So I think it was more for clarification.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, the first 3 have been change orders, and so.
Is anything else you need, Commissioner Davis Johnson?
No, unless the next one is a change order.
No, we're moving into the other heard items.
Okay, okay.
I'm entertaining the motion.
There's no additional appropriation incorporated into this. It's just a change order to use the contingency funds. Is that right?
That is correct. And if you look at the information provided under the purpose, it appears that the other change orders were to use up the contingency funds also. So I take that as a good sign that we didn't need all that contingency money, that it can now be used for different purposes to improve the fields.
Okay, thank you for the clarity. Appreciate that. I'll entertain the motion.
Move to recommend approval.
Second.
Moving properly second. Are there any more comments? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor of the motion, hands and words. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. And now we'll go into, before I do that, Ms. Horner, I heard you're retiring, and I know I'll get a chance to say it more later on, but just want to say thank you. Consummate professional. And that's why I recommend you for a national position. And just keep up the good work. And we're going to miss you. You've been with me a long time, but I think you've done a great job of just moving us forward. And in chaotic situation, you're the calm. And so you've been calm and just showed us the way on how to do it. And you work your way up. I think people need to know how the county awards people who can work their way up and then achieve that level of success that you've done. So thank you. I have more to say, but we're going to miss you.
Thank you so
And
much for
I
your kind
second-
words. Oh, thank
I
you,
second that
Commissioner.
emotion.
I'd just like to know what Mr. Williams is doing to run off our good staff.
Well, I tell you what I'm doing is panicking, but
You better get
We'll figure
some
it
help
out.
quick. You better get
Yeah,
some
for
help
sure.
quick. You always figuring it out. I won't.
we will, but we're gonna miss the heck out of Catherine.
That's right. That Horner really laid it out. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
We'll go to previously heard items. 1765, resolution of the governing authority of DeKalb County, Georgia, acknowledge the affordable housing crisis in DeKalb and to call upon federal, state, and local legislators and elected officials to pass legislation supporting home ownership and rent stabilization. I'll go to the sponsor, but also I think we're waiting on information. And you can talk to this, Madam Chair as well, Cochran Johnson from the Law Department. Take it away.
Yes, sir. To be honest, Mr. Chair, I know we've been back and forth a few times. I don't know to what extent I presented because I think I may have started a time or two. And I don't want to waste, the committee's time, but to kind of give a rundown because I don't think we had enough time each time we would end up being cut off. So the resolution that I have in front of you, it's very clear. We start with the fact that 7 million homes short in terms of affordable housing, but then to localize it. In 2021, Georgia ranked number 7 out of the 10 worst states for affordable housing. And this is based on data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Also, in the rental market during 2021, we saw over a 20% increase in rental rates, which for Americans, most folk, it's absolutely alarming. Also, what we're seeing because of a lack of inventory. Now, it actually started, according to the data, in 2008 when the bubble burst. You had investors coming into residential communities purchasing single-family homes. And now that market, the single-family residential market, is the quickest growing sector of the investment industry for Wall Street. So what you're seeing now is many investors, both Wall Street, LLCs, and private investors coming into communities purchasing what were once residential properties. And you're seeing a shift as single-family homes are being removed from the marketplace and transitioned into for-lease properties. And in many instances with these properties, what you see is that approximately 80% of them, 80% of those homes are rented at a far higher rate than would be standard market value if they were an actual purchase. So all of these things are creating a structural imbalance in the housing market. And for many people, the American dream is no longer a dream. It's a dream deferred because they are not able to compete with private investors, LLCs, and Wall Street. Also, I think it's important to note that when we look at the affordable housing market, for the average American, almost 500,000 people are defined as low income. And that means they earn $1,250 a month or less. And 30% of those individuals now, they spend 30% of their earnings on housing. So what I'm asking here is that we do acknowledge that there is an affordable housing crisis and DeKalb is not unique. This is going on in major cities and urban markets across the United States. But in terms of what we do, I ask that we create a rental registry. I believe we may have given some discussion to it, but why a rental registry? because what you find as LLCs, private investors in Wall Street comes into residential communities, you are seeing that we don't know where our rental properties are located throughout DeKalb County. Through a rental registry, it would require every property owner to register any property that will be utilized as a rental with DeKalb County, so we know exactly where they are. As such, what you see with rental registries across the United States is that, code enforcement, it's an ongoing problem with rentals that are higher than in residential properties, that there's difficulty tracking down who the rightful owner is because those homes are occupied by tenants. But through this rental registry, it would require the property owner to be present or us have access to them. And it would also require an initial inspection to ensure that properties that are being utilized for rent are decent and in order in terms of the housing itself. Because there is an ongoing issue here generally with code enforcement that's associated with these properties. And in terms of rental registries, what you're seeing too is in some instances, and this is what we as a body has the discretion to do, they charge the equivalent of a hotel tax. Because for these investors, these are revenue generating properties. They are literally their business. And DeKalb County could actually receive taxes from these properties that are above and beyond, what we look at as it relates to tax assessments. Baltimore, Seattle, Denver, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Louisville, Narragansett, Rhode Island, all of them have rental registries of this nature. And the taxes that would be associated with the rentals could offset the cost that's associated with inspectors. Also, when you view the rental registries, as a general rule, the bulk of these particular areas that have rental registries require an inspection every 3 years. But again, that's totally at our discretion. Also, this is very valuable, the rental registry, for understanding the dynamics of the communities that are shifting. And, for us as a body, when people come before us to build new communities, as a general rule, we have been capping rentals at 10%. But what can we do to stop or prevent a proliferation in communities that are older, where we do not have HOAs and there's no such requirement? That's where a rental registry could be very valuable, because we would have the ability to see the amount of rental units that exist within a community. And that would allow the way for us to create legislation that could prohibit expansion of rental units within these traditional R100 communities and single family residentials. I think that pretty much covers everything as it relates to the rental registry that I suggest as being a common sense measure for us to undertake. But I also want us to consider number 3, implementation of broad-based tenant protections to limit rental increases, ancillary fees and fines, and to promote security of tenure to ensure the property rights of landlords do not take priority over the fundamental role of housing, which is supporting life, safety, and welfare of citizens. Now, when I say that, what you see happening here is, as I just said to you, in 2021, Metro Atlanta, we saw an increase of over 20% in rental rates. But across the United States, in markets where there's extreme growth and a shortage of housing, they are beginning to cap the amount that rental rates can increase year over year. Now, as a general rule, what I've found is the average cap rate is between 4 and 5%. Now, currently, as it relates to rental control and rental caps, California, Maryland, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Washington, D.C., and Virginia all have set caps. The most stringent cap has been set by St. Paul, Minnesota, and they do not allow rental rates to increase over 3% over any given year. But again, that's for us as a body to have that conversation. I'm just bringing to everyone, data and information that I've found, and we could make that determination. But to see 20% increases in rental rates year over year, we can't continue like that. We've got to do something to level the playing field because it is unrealistic. Also, lifting on number 5, and I'll be brief on this one. I'm asking that the governing authority of DeKalb County, encouraging them to lift state, local, and federal governmental sponsored agency restrictions on condo lending to prevent barriers to first-time buyers, because there are often more stringent requirements associated with condominium ownership. And it deters often purchases of condominiums by first-time home buyers. And the last bullet, number 6, I'm asking that we advocate for improved financing from lenders like the Federal Housing Administration, Fannie Mac, and Freddie Mae to improve the terms of financing for purchase and rehab loans. And that's very key, because many people that are seeking affordable housing, they shy away from the purchase of homes that may require rehab because it's very difficult to get one loan combined. And there are a variety of reasons for that. But in many instances, your bungalows and smaller homes that could be revitalized through the access of loans are overlooked in the marketplace, and first-time home buyers aren't able to take advantage of them, even though they pose a far cheaper and more feasible option. So that's pretty much an overview of the things that I believe would be beneficial for us to consider as a body. And at this time, I will yield to questions surrounding them and do my best to answer based upon my knowledge in this area as a layperson, not an expert.
All right, let me start. I had a few questions. Based on the resolution and the numbers, a lot of those statements are going to have us, we're going to have to work with the federal and state governments. Now, is that listed because they're making it seem like the county will have the power over loans? We can't we can do a registry, but that's got to be at the state level at some point. Is there something in there that you can just state that we want the government, federal government to do this, want the state government to do that, so people won't assume that this resolution is that we can do all of those things that are listed? That's one thing. And I'll ask you in the law department. The other part is, can you delineate between a corporation who buys homes versus a mom and pop who buys homes legally, or do they have to, they're both the same? Or is there something in the law department can help me with this as well? Because I don't think you can put the corporation who's buying homes and you got the small investors buying homes. They all both got to be in the same pot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll throw those out as my couple of questions as we go forward.
And let me say, Commissioner, if I may, and Mr. Chair, because I have to speak when I'm thinking, when I hear you, as it relates to the small investor and the large investor, believe it or not, whether you're Wall Street or a private investor, the outcomes are the same.
Right, that's right.
Because they are literally buying for rent. And it's now called BFR, buy for rent market. And it's the fastest growing segment because they're able to materialize the highest profits from these homes. As a matter of fact, I was just shocked just yesterday. For the second time, I was riding down Flat Shoals Parkway and I saw Invitation Homes. I saw a van for them. They are one of the 3 largest out of Washington that literally are buying up, not Washington, but from New York and Wall Street, that are buying up properties. And, you know, they do have a modus operandi. You see, and, you know, you really do see patterns of where they're choosing to purchase. So I was shocked to begin seeing their vans driving up and down our streets and pulling over.
And Promise Homes. Promise Homes is out there too.
Absolutely. So that being said, I think the effect, whether they're a small investor or a large, is still the same. So as it relates to making them all, you know, sign up on a rental registry, I don't think we would probably have the ability, or probably should, separate one from the other, because the outcome and the impact of what they're doing is still the same, is my thought.
Right. And the only reason I brought that up, because I know the trend is we're looking at the corporations who are buying up houses. But when South DeKalb was first inundated with investors, it was always small business people. And then we look at TLAC. A lot of the landlords that are getting the funding are just like small mom and pop operations. So that's one I just want the public to know, that there's no delineation between a corporate investor and a person who may be a small business person who's investing and buying homes, because that was the first iteration in South DeKalb. We had a lot of investors who were buying up homes. We said we buy ugly houses. There was a lot of groups back then, but I just wanted to get some clarity. And thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I believe, yes, you have some more hands.
Okay, all right, here we go. Commissioner Davis Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President Officer, and thank you, Commissioner Cochran Johnson, for your presentation. I think it really is good sense legislation. And I think that Commissioner Larry Johnson asked a couple of questions that I would have for legal is, what aspects of what Commissioner Cochran Johnson proposed do we have authority over? And so that would just be my questions, because I think that what she's proposing make good sense and is needed in DeKalb. So my question would just be, what do we have control over, and that we don't? Maybe we can specify in the legislation who has control over that piece, and encourage them to work with DeKalb on it.
Great insight. Commissioner Rader, then Commissioner Terry.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. You know, this certainly is aspirational. I think it's intended to be, as was mentioned before, some aspects of this are at odds with current state policy and code. So I think we need to identify those impediments, but I also think there's an opportunity to potentially work around them. I think that since these buy to rent type of companies they need to be licensed to do business in DeKalb County. There are means to be able to collect information associated with their business license application that might include a comprehensive list of their locations and the properties that they are operating, that could give us a lot of the information that we're looking for. And so I do think that we might go through this and identify means that would achieve legitimate public purposes without creating mechanisms that are prevented in state law. I also think that it is important for us to think about that license mechanism as a way to structure how we expect folks to do business in the county. Anytime that you have property that is not owner occupied, there is a economic equation that the owner is making as to how little they can spend on capital maintenance and operation relative to the rents that they're collecting. So we need to have mechanisms that ensure, ideally in the same way theoretically as HUD's operating contracts for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, that mandates how to the standard of maintenance and operation that is pursued by these folks. Conventional wisdom before the real estate crash of 2007 through 10 was that it was not economically feasible for corporations to operate scattered site rental in this way. They've, quote, figured out a way to do it, but it doesn't mean they're not trying to squeeze as much profit out of them as possible. And therefore, that incentive to go lean on maintenance and other factors that affect the quality of life in a community, end up being issues in play. So I do think that we ought to look very strongly at DeKalb County's ability to regulate businesses as a means of trying to achieve some of these goals. As it relates to condominiums, I want us to better understand the condominium dynamic, because as many of you know, some of the most intractable problems at Brannon Hill or the old Blue Skies and those types of quote condo projects was due to the fact that at some point in the past, a owner chose to convert to condominiums apartment complexes with a lot of shared systems, particularly water. And in some cases, the common areas and other aspects of it. And with that diffused ownership and uneven adherence to the requirements to pay into the common area fees, some of those particular conversion type condos have really become problematic in terms of being able to maintain standards there, and importantly, be able to collect county fees for utilities. So as we look at condominiums, I think that we need to look at both directions. I do agree that, a multifamily unit is often the most cost-effective option for a family to start out with. But if we do want to facilitate the ownership route, I'm really hoping that we learn something from our experience with some of the declining condo projects that we've got in the county, and try to make sure that we don't repeat any of those concerns. But I do think that it would be great for this to potentially identify, or either that or through our housing strategy, means that we can use authorities that are currently available to accomplish some of these goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Terry and Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really like this resolution because I basically introduced it back in February. And I want to just everyone watching at home might think that we are in worlds apart. We're on our own little view screens, and we might be 100 miles away, but there's a commissioner right there, and there's a commissioner right there. And instead of working together on what we are acknowledging in this resolution is a crisis, we are dithering with analysis that is causing paralysis. Wouldn't it have been more effective to support the creation of the housing committee, because we could have already be working on half of these things? And through that working process, we could have established that the first 2 points actually we can't do on state law. So we just move on past them, but we spent 15 minutes talking about something we can't even do. But we should amend this resolution to say, state DeKalb delegation, please change the law. But they're not going to do it because they're Republican controlled, and it's been preempted for like 20 years. The last point should go on our federal legislative agenda. I don't think we've ever had a federal legislative agenda. Maybe we have, I'm not sure. We all focus on the state delegation, but if we're talking about legislative agenda items, we got Denton's, right? Let's ask them. We need to go to Washington. We need to go meet with our senators and our members of Congress right now because it's a crisis. So I'm going to take a little bit of issue of us saying this is a crisis. And if we pass this, good. I'm glad we're recognizing it as a crisis. But this was a crisis in February when I introduced the Housing Committee. Everyone agreed that we were going to get that study updated, and it didn't get updated on time, or maybe it did get updated in time and we just haven't gotten it yet. It's 3/12 and I still haven't gotten it. Maybe the PECS committee members got it and they're going to forward it to us when they feel ready, they can do that. But I really, really think that we would get a lot more done if we would work together. And even if we don't work together, we could at least communicate with each other. So when someone introduces an agenda item or sends an email or raises an important point that they think is important at a committee meeting, because that's the only time that we get together, there might be some follow-up. There might be, hey, chief of staff, talk to their chief of staff, let's get together. But that doesn't happen. And when we don't work together and we don't work on these crises that are happening right now and have been happening, guess who hurts? It's our constituents. And I just want to point out that in this resolution, we're acknowledging the unaffordability to rent in DeKalb, but what we voted on today will raise the rents of every renter in DeKalb because we have not rolled back the millage rate. 7.8% across the board increase in tax revenues. Every apartment complex owner has two options. They're going to ask for a lower assessment or they're just going to raise rents, and they might actually do both. And so let's just go ahead and pass this resolution. Why are we waiting? Let's just do it. I'm so tired of us saying that there's a crisis and then we just dither in committee.
All right, Commissioner Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First comment I would say is I know affordable housing is on everyone's minds, but I would remind us that without a good sewer system, you can have no housing. And so the work that we're doing for housing in general, let alone affordable housing through the sewer system is the big first step, no matter what. The second item I would add, or thing I'd like to say is for Commissioner Cochran Johnson or Terry, this right here would be a great talking point for our legislative ask for this year. And I hope that you guys are able to reach out to central staff and work with them to flesh it out. I will say, as a Dorville council member who had looked, as well as a Norcross employee who had looked into rental registries, that door has been closed fairly strongly at the state legislature. And so whatever we come up with, a trip through ACCG may well be a very wise approach, and see if we can get some of the other counties to agree with the concerns that we're facing. When going to the ACCG meetings, when I talked with at least one of the other commissioners from South Georgia, that commissioner has the same problem. A relative of his works for a legislative branch in one of those counties and has to live with him because the rent's too expensive. There's no affordable housing within a reasonable commute to get to work to do her job. And it is an issue that affects us here in DeKalb County, but we're sort of one of many people, one of many sensors, if you look at us as a network within the state of Georgia that have had to deal with these issues. And if we can get someone like ACCG or perhaps GMA to work with us on this, or at least acknowledge that it's an issue, then perhaps we can move this stone uphill and make some progress. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Commissioner Cochran Johnson, I'll give you some closing thoughts, and then we will probably see if we can, some of the information and facts that came out, we can have law department look over and see if you can endure with us to do another 30-day deferral so we can get more those things flushed out. So I'll leave the final comments and then I'll entertain a motion from the committee.
Absolutely. And thank you, Mr. Chair. In particular, I think the item out of all of the recommendations that is most important to us and will have the greatest effect is the creation of a rental registry. I would say that we need to engage ACCG because, again, what we're experiencing here in DeKalb is not an isolated situation. It is a state situation. But the rental registry is a matter of policy, and we do have that control. I do agree, and that's why I drafted the legislation as I did, as it relates to encouraging financing, greater and improved financing, because most of our most valuable products do come from the federal level. So in terms of a federal legislative agenda and or reaching out to our senators and our congressmen to enlist their support, it's easy enough for that to be done. So I'm more than happy to take 30 days, work with the law department, come back and have greater discussion or more in-depth discussion on what can be done, particularly as it relates to the rental registry itself, because I really believe that that is going to be key. We need to know where these rental units are located. We need to hold them to a degree of accountability that oftentimes now we cannot, because we're unable to reach the property owner. We also, and I don't want to make a broad statement, but we all know as commissioners that we receive, I know personally countless emails where code compliance has difficulty reaching property owners to correct or remediate issues. So all of these things would become very important. It would allow us to better control. And once we know where these properties are located, again, just as we do with personal care homes, we only allow a certain amount within a defined territory. But if we are requiring currently no more than 10% of rental units in newly constructed communities, this will allow us to begin geographically targeting where our rental units are in our older communities, and we can hold them to the same standard so that we do not have communities that are transitioned as a result of what we're seeing in the marketplace. So thank you for allowing me to present the legislation, and I'm more than fine with continuing to work on it and reporting back to committee.
Thank you so much. And if you get any updates in 2 weeks before we come back to the committee, just have them, please send it to all of us so we can look at it. Law Department, Commissioner Cochran Johnson, a red line of the resolution and what the proposed changes would be great. I'll get to you in a minute, Commissioner Terry. I just want to get a motion on the table for deferral.
So move.
Need a second.
30 days.
30 days, is that what you're looking for?
Is that what yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, second.
I move and probably say Commissioner Terry, and we got a couple of more items after that. Commissioner Terry?
I just want to be a team player here because I think this is really important. I'm pretty sure I don't want us working in a direction that it has a dead end. And what I heard at the last meeting and what I have known since when I was mayor of Clarkston, when I said, let's do a rental registry in Clarkston because we have the same issues in Clarkston as DeKalb, I was told that state law preempts that. So I want to try to just stop us before we get to a dead end. Can we just get some acknowledgement that we should not work on a rental registry because we can't do it? But I could be wrong. Please correct me. And instead, let's just make it a legislative agenda item. Central staff is watching, so we'll just make it a legislative agenda item and we'll strike that from the resolution and move things forward. And then I understand, I get the 30-day deferral. We got a lot of things going on, but we cannot say something is a crisis and then say we're going to defer it for 30 days. You just can't. It's not in keeping with reality. And to me, and my heart hurts right now because I know all of y'all care about your constituents and you all want to do the right thing. But if anyone listening to us right now who is at a state, as Commissioner Patrick pointed out, and as I've heard from our own staff members, that they are having housing affordability issues. They're looking at us saying, oh, well, they just kicked the can down the road another 30 days. So it therefore must not be a crisis. And I wonder how many people it would take to show up outside of our doors saying that this is a crisis before we treat it like a crisis. So maybe just in the interim, just in the spirit of trying to keep this thing moving, can the law department please tell us if we're going to a dead end or if we should course correct?
And let me add to that. First of all, we're not kicking the can down the road. Whether you do something right now is not going to solve what's been going on for decades. And what the county is doing right now is we have a TLAC. We received over $50 million to help folks with rental assistance. We're helping folks with utilities. We're doing what we can in the middle of so many other issues. We got a health crisis, we got a violence crisis, you got 50 crises that probably going on at the same time. But we have to do what we have to do at our level to help out. And a lot of things we're reacting because the federal and state government has to do something about the housing crisis. They had to do something about the loan regulations that people can't get a loan for a house, or they're dealing with pad splits or anything out there. So we're just trying to do what Commissioner Cochran Johnson and what you're talking about is how do we play our part in the middle of all of these things that are going on. And that's why what you're saying, Commissioner Terry, what you're trying to do with the housing study and with Commissioner Cochran Johnson, finding a way to combine those things that we can have a legislative agenda items for January. Still gonna have to wait because the federal government will be on recess in 2 weeks. And the state won't start back until January. So with those two entities who make up the most of the housing policy, nothing gonna get done between those periods, but we will have something in place to present. And want to be careful how we do it so we can have a solid recommendations as we move forward. So there's no intent to kick the can down the road because we all are dealing with it in our districts. But I just want to make sure people know we care and we understand. But it's only, the reality is a certain amount of things that we can do at our local level and what we can do, which is to urge and do resolutions and to continue to fund as much as we can people who are hurting and need help, homeless, mental health, such like. So Mr. Welch, can you chime in before I move to one more item?
Absolutely, sir. I was just going to note that I've been taking extensive notes through this conversation, and we are prepared to do as asked to bring back this resolution, noting what is within the power of this body and what may need assistance at the state or federal level to accomplish. 30 days is more than sufficient for us to do that. And as noted, we may recommend that some of these items convert into legislative agenda items or simply be reworded here. But that is our charge. I've been, as I said, been taking careful notes. I have all the questions, and we will sit down with Commissioner Cochran Johnson and her team and work through those questions before this reappears, sir.
And just by having this dialogue, we were able to find a couple of things. We may create legislative items out of that resolution. So it was very productive and very good discussion. I think we need to have it. And it's timely. So as a motion, it's been properly second. All in favor to defer for 30 days. Raise your hand in words. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. I'm going to skip to status update. I want to get an update from Mr. Williams on the Partnership for Southern Equity. And then commissioners, the item 1546, a small box retail and the ADR we'll have on our next meeting on the 26th. So, Mr. Williams, can you give me an update?
Sure. Well, yes.
And also have
Very briefly, yes, Mr. Chair, trying to get a meeting to move forward with Mr. Alvarado, Mr. Woodbury, and the CEO, and myself, of course. We had a good meeting probably 6 weeks ago by now with Mr. Alvarado and other members of the team. We're in, and the chief of staff for the commission and some of those the key staff to kind of get an overview of what the Partnership for Southern Equity was contemplating. The next phase would be conducting interviews, I believe, with our departments. And prior to moving that forward, we just want to, the CEO will want to ensure that he is clearly understanding what the objectives are, what the process will be, and the time commitment and so forth with the departments, just in light of everything else that they're working on. But we're just trying to make that happen. I don't know that it would be a very lengthy discussion, but it is one that's critical to move it forward.
Okay, Mr. Alvarado, would you like to add some of the things you all have been working on? And we look forward, Mr. Williams, to getting our report in the next 30 days on where we are with moving forward, because this is very crucial to the county. Mr. Alvarado?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the members of the committee. Joel Alvarado, Vice President for Strategy and Engagement and Partnership for Southern Equity. So on behalf of Nathaniel Smith, our founder and CEO, we really appreciate the vision and leadership you've offered, Commissioner Johnson, in recognizing the opportunities that exist to further understand the policy practices and programs within the county and to assess it through the lens of equity. And so I think many in this call know who we are and what we do. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to offer opportunity for my colleague, Kazim Woodbury, who's leading this effort. We had put together a quick deck to give an update. If there is time to do so, we will.
Yeah, let's do that right quick so we can show the committee, and then we can come back for further details at a later meeting.
Sounds good. So I will pass it to Mr. Woodbury, who will lead in that conversation.
Thank you so much, Joel, and thank you again, Chairperson Larry Johnson, and the other commissioners on this call, as well as the COO, Zachary Williams, and other staff of the commission and the administration. I'm going to share my screen. We just have a few slides for this update.
All right. Mr. Matowski, I'll let you do it.
Yes, sir. You should have the ability.
Okay. Okay, just a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Fantastic. Okay, this is just our landing slide. I can just go through that really quickly, and we can just get to the nuts and bolts of this presentation. Joel has already indicated who we are in his introduction.
Oh yeah, go to number 3.
And so this is just a slide to illustrate how we're taking this approach to equity versus equality. And as you can see in this illustration, there is a bicycle of the same size given to every person, and that's equality. But it doesn't take into account the different abilities that each person has. And the approach that PSC is taking and working with the county is to take a more equitable approach, which looks at each person's ability and provides for them what is the resource that they need in order to engage the opportunity. So we just wanted to plot that slide right there. And we see PSC defines equity as access to just and fair opportunity. Again, a landing slide here. And we just, again, how we got here. There was the governing authority of DeKalb County passed a resolution 2020-0673 declaring racism as a public health crisis. That's how we got here. We've been talking a lot about crisis today, and there's a lot of crisis going on in this country, unfortunately, but we're here to address that. Where we have been, DeKalb County would like to achieve the following objectives: recommendations on increasing equity for current policies, for future policies, frameworks for measuring equity in each policy within the Board of Commissioners, potential leadership training separate for the Leadership Academy, guidance on operationalizing equity policies, and feasibility analysis for the creation of an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. So our steps in approaching this work is starting centrally with key informant interviews, and these help PSC and the team distill what's happening inside and outside the county and the rest of the data that we have. And then they go outward towards the creation of an equity task force And that task force is a critical piece of our work. It helps to clarify, strengthen, and advance the organization's equity practices and impact on DeKalb County's internal governance and operations, as well as its standing on equity issues in the broader community. And that task force is made up of the representatives across the county, both from the commission side as well as from the administration side. To the other end is the Racial Equity 101 training, which is really baselining the understanding of equity and racial equity, the history surrounding that, contemporary examples, and how they show up in our current experiences, and specifically to DeKalb County. So where we are in that process, and as COO Zach Williams mentioned, we did have a meeting with him, and Catherine Horner was also present with the commission staff. We had a great conversation, a champion of equity, and we're grateful for that. And we were able to identify some key informants for that engagement. Subsequently, we followed up with some additional documentation to help provide some additional context. And we're at the point, as the COO mentioned, at the point of a senior leadership session with the CEO and the COO to address any concerns, share recommendations, and best practices as we move forward in this process. And once that has taken place, then we're anticipating the dissemination of the CEO memo to the department heads and other key stakeholders, expressing support and encouragement for widespread and full participation in this initiative. And that's the conclusion.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much, Mr. Woodbury. Before we conclude, any questions from the committee? Anything so far? Because they're going to come back. I just want to give us an update on what was going on. But the next step is to talk with our CEO and Zach to start the framework. We're meeting with the stakeholders, the department heads. So thank you all so much. At this moment, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn so we can get the FAB.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Look like you didn't want to go,
I
Commissioner.
just have a comment. I'm going to
All
give
right.
us 10 minutes. Okay, so we'll start at 4:45.
All right, moved and properly second. All in favor of adjournment. Thank you all for being here. Motion carries. See you soon. Bye-bye.